and kind of go through a little bit of kind of just an introduction of what we do at the Freedom of the Press Foundation, some of the kind of stuff that we do, both for journalists as well as for sources looking to leak the next cool story. So the first place to find out about us, freedom.press, is basically kind of where we are. So just to give you kind of a little bit of background, there's a whole Wikipedia page about our history, but it kind of basically started with a bunch of folks that were at EFF that wanted to do kind of more journalist-focused things. We have a mix of kind of advocacy, crowdfunding for privacy-enhancing technology, like Signal, for example, which you see down here. And then something that I kind of help out with more closely in the digital security team here in New York, which is our online training. So in addition to kind of what we do for newsrooms, as far as you can bring us into your newsroom and we'll tell you all about how you shouldn't, use your cat's name as your password for everything. We will, also have guides on how to, ask people not to use their pet's name as for everything. And yeah, so this is kind of an introduction. We're going to be building this area, this training area out kind of in the near future. We have kind of a multi-tiered approach to how we think about security training. For example, the in-person training, that's something that works out well for us for existing newsrooms, because a lot of the media happens to be in the same city that our digital trainers are at, basically. But not everybody can afford to have all of us drop shipped into their newsroom to talk about stuff. So we have kind of roadmap kind of into the future that we're basically experimenting with different forms of getting people more accustomed and aware of digital security practices in journalism. Further down the future, some of these are announced, some of these aren't announced yet. But we're talking to journalism schools about how they could incorporate digital security training into their curricula, because that's a really good way to just kind of integrate this very important facet of skills into the pipeline of journalism students coming out to work in the field. There's also just more of what's going to happen here in this section. We have this idea within security, within information security and digital security kind of training, of threat models. So everybody has different needs. Certain recommendations and solutions will work for some people and maybe not so much for others. For example, we have Secure Drop as a kind of super hardcore means of leaking to the press in a way that is as close as one can get to being resilient to state level 3-letter acronym kind of threats. Not everybody needs to have that kind of level of security, so it you can vary. So sometimes the threat will be scarier, but also require less kind of elite technical hacker skills. Even things thinking about jurisdictions of where things live. One of the issues we've been working a lot with documentary filmmakers that are kind of a little more mobile, kind of all over the world. Some of them will cross into Russian waters in the Arctic to do a documentary about stuff there, and they want to know what's going on. And things that we wouldn't recommend for Secure Drop, for example, using Google services, are actually relatively the best way to go as far as keeping things out of Putin's reach. So these things can vary, but the goal kind of in the near term that we're going to kind of work on in the fall and the winter is to get kind of a very, very short set of introductory things that work for absolutely everybody, where it's even if your threat model's a jealous ex-lover or Vladimir Putin or the FBI, or just online haters, because who doesn't have haters? We have basically a set of guides that we're working on that will kind of give people a good baseline to work with, that they can then build on top and customize to what they want to do later on. This is kind of deviating a bit from the approach of being a resource that has everything, which has an unfortunate tendency to become too big to maintain. There's a few organizations that excel at it, but it's literally two, Tactical Tech and the EFF. They're self-defense, security in a box, and self-defense security self-defense guide. I forget what the actual acronym is, but they have a team that just works on perfecting that nonstop. everybody else has tried this, and unfortunately, digital security documentation kind of rots over time. I think, so Matt, who's also in the room, Matt Mitchell, also has this idea of adding expiration dates to guides to like let people know it's like, this might be totally outdated by the time you read this. So we're actually going to be incorporating that as part of what we do here, which is going to be neat. So that's kind of what's coming up. So just like it'll be baseline things like, how to get your data off of data brokers so that you don't get doxed as easily, because that's an emerging threat that we see against journalists. And it's just a good idea to like, de-dox yourself as much as you can. And then other things like, how many of you have heard of two-factor authentication? Awesome, cool, yeah. I think two-factor authentication, when implemented properly, is like the best thing since sliced bread. And that's like part of what we see as useful, like kind of as a baseline of like, no matter what your threat model is, 2FA is basically a good idea. And yeah, so that's kind of the mix of things that will go into this. This way it's also not overwhelming, and it'll give a good place to start. Here's what you do for your computer, what your device, for your newsroom, and then if you want more, contact us for training. So that's kind of the experiment that we're going to be kind of trying out later on. Cool. So aside from that, we also have a few other things that we're up to for, let's see, secure the news, I think is the actual website. Yeah. Oh yeah, we got another cool like TLD domain .news. This is another kind of thing that we've been pushing as far as wanting to make sure that we have HTTPS in as many websites as possible, particularly for news websites. This kind of dovetails nicely into a thing that I wrote that was basically a lot of the advocacy that's been done here in terms of like getting more sites to use HTTPS. Made things like so this is, there's no short link to this, but you can like Google the article if you just want to see like me kind of like sitting by the like fireplace with like a glass of scotch, like, talking about the good old days of like building cantenas out of Pringles or whatever. This kind of goes over to like why certain like, Wi-Fi issues were really scary a long time ago, but maybe less so now in this case of the mitigation of HTTPS. And it's important, I think, a colleague of mine, Martin Shelton, has a guide on basically saying that, creating what's called security skepticism. And that's basically the idea of kind of looking at what seems like very sensationalist press around security and being able to kind of fact check yourself to understand that like, you're not totally doomed. These are the implications of what this particular breach or whatever means, and kind of like thinking through that way, and just like emotive thinking, even if you're not like super technical, of just having an understanding of the limitations and the kind of nuances of different kind of things that are reported as elite hacks. So cool. So that's kind of the idea there. As far as like secure the news goes, this has been kind of where we're at right now. We still have a lot of news websites not on HTTPS. LA Times, for example, isn't yet. The Idaho State Journal is unfortunately not on HTTPS. So we still got a ways to go. We do have a lot of sites that are doing quite well and are implemented. And then you can see kind of a leaderboard of what we're up to there. The other thing too is kind of going back to newsroom kind of advocacy. My colleague Peter and a few others at the Society to Protect Journalists have created this Freedom Press Tracker. So this is basically helping document, essentially attacks on the press since January in this case. So we're looking at, arrests, physical attacks, a few other things, and kind of like, keeping a watchful eye as these occur. Like, not necessarily just like digital stuff, but just like having an understanding, I guess, of like the kind of threats that the press faces, like within the United States. So that's another project that we're working on. The other thing too is like, I think pivoting back into the idea of alternate networks and things, we also have a cool project called SecureDrop, which I kind of alluded to earlier. This is an open source project. It was originally a project made by, or co-created by Aaron Schwartz, among others, to create a super, super secure, anonymous way to leak sensitive information to the press with like really like intense threat models in mind. So this is our current website. We're going to redesign it. We're going to be launching that soon, hopefully. And we have kind of this list that we have, the directory of all the news organizations that you can leak the P-tape to. So there's like all these, like, you know, there's CPJ, there's the Globe, there's the New York Times now, ProPublica, you know, these all now have SecureDrop. So this is kind of where we're at. And if you can notice here, this is what's called a .onion address. So within the internet, there is what, you know, people talk about in kind of interchangeable terms that aren't like really well defined as the deep web or the dark web or whatever. And one of the things that gets thrown around in that category is the idea of what are called Tor onion services. So the Tor anonymity network is a means of using the internet anonymously. And it has a lot of, you know, technical infrastructure and methodologies and kind of architecture that help it do that I won't get into because that's like a 3-hour long talk. But the idea is that like you can have not only the ability to visit regular websites anonymously, but you can have the ability for the anonymity to work the other way around as well, so that you can run an anonymous website. So that's why we have these .onion addresses, is like, even though these are actually, in our case, not that important to be anonymous, because it's like we know the New York Times building is, like it's on 42nd Street. So basically, this lets you have kind of this anonymous encrypted connection that is very resilient against censorship and against surveillance and tracking. And SecureDrop is built on top of that. So we can go to, let's say, NPR isn't here yet. Let's do Forbes. So this won't work in Chrome because it's not the Tor browser. But if you were to have the Tor browser, then you can go to that. There'll be a cool page. You'll get like a little thing. You'd be like, drop us some cool docs, and then you wait like a million years because Tor is kind of a slow network because it's bouncing your network connection all across the world. And then, boom, you have a persistent identity, you have a code name, which sounds like super spy and it's cool, and, you have a conversation with the person you're talking to, and you can basically work with the press in this very anonymous, very secure way, which is really cool. Awesome. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but all right, cool. So anyway, that's what we do. It's kind of a mixed bag of like, asking people not to use their pet's name as their password, going up to like super cypherpunk, like mirror shades and like black coat level, like, Tor stuff. So yeah. Thanks.